I was very much struck to the core in some sense by how revolutionary the translation into the vernacular of the biblical writings in Europe 400 or 500 years ago truly was, and how that jump-started the development of literacy, not only in Europe and the transformation of European society as a consequence, but also across the entire world.
Translation is an art as much as it is a science. And anybody who's ever done a Bible translation has had to make certain choices. Some things don't translate well from one language into another. If you think of something as simple as saying, hello, how are you? What does that mean? How do you exist? Or what are you feeling at the time? So even simple phrases can be very difficult to translate from one language to another.
Word by word doesn't make sense because the meaning of a text isn't only in the words, right? It's in the words and the phrases and the sentences and the paragraphs, and then the relationship between the paragraphs. It's in the whole thing. And then it's in the context of the thing as well, because with the Bible, there's extra biblical texts that inform it. So then you kind of ask yourself, well, what are you doing when you decide what it means? And it looks like you're doing something like you're taking the abstract text, and then you're imagining it, so you turn it into an image, and then you have to represent it as an embodied reality. That's kind of what the meaning is. And then when you get the embodied reality, which is the point of the text, then you can translate it into your language.
Luther, quite famously, said that his job was to write a translation in a manner that fit the way that the common people of Saxony spoke. And so that's what he did with his translation, and it instantly became a classic in German. It has a profound effect on the German language.
The difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament is that in the Old Testament, in order to be a priest, you had to be a Levite. So in 1520s, Martin Luther writes a letter to the Christian nobility of Germany that says, every child of God should now be priest, serving their father. You cannot be a priest if you don't know God, and you can't know God if you don't study His Word. And that's why the Protestant movement in Europe becomes the force that brings literacy to everyone.
The Chinese invented the printing press, but it didn't produce this widespread explosion of literacy.
Printing technology in China and in Korea, they didn't reform Asia because those books didn't inspire the confidence that words can lead you to truth, that ultimate reality was word, logos.
And thought.
Thought,
and dialogue
sense.
and communication.
The Buddhists had printed 130,000 pages of Tripitaka, which was their scriptures. And there were so many books that in these small temples, you will have to have rotating bookcases. But actually, nobody was reading the books because Buddha taught ultimate reality as silence, not logos, not word. So what these priests were doing were rotating the bookcases and meditating on the sound of rotation. The sound of these sacred books rotating would empty their mind, bring silence, get rid of thought. They looked upon it as mantra. Mantra is sound without sense.
Mm-hmm. Right, and that was an attempt to silence the semantic brain.
Yes.
And I mean, there's some psychological utility in that, but to sacrifice the semantic completely to the non-semantic seems like a terrible loss. And so you had the combination of the Gutenberg press with a missionary zeal to distribute the Bible to everyone, regardless of their social status, that turned the printing press into something that was truly socially revolutionary.
This is the most significant translation of the Bible into English ever. This is the first edition, 1611, of what's today called the King James Bible. This is the translation that essentially was the only English translation for about 400 years, close to 400 years. And so much of our language, our thought patterns, imagery that we still use in English today is because of this translation. It was a very important translation because in the period before 1611, in England, of course, there's a lot of religious debate, a lot of tension. King Henry decreed the English church separate from the Catholic Church, which meant that for the first time there was permitted to be an English Bible rather than a Latin use of the Bible. Catholics regained power with Queen Mary. Again, no English translations, there was dissent. So you had Protestants, you had Catholics arguing. Of course, you had the 1604 gunpowder plot when they tried to blow up Parliament. And that year, King James said, look, we're done with this. We're going to have one Bible for all people, Catholic, Protestant. So he gathered a large team of the best scholars in England, in Hebrew, in Greek, in history, and over the next 7 years produced this remarkable translation, which we're still familiar with today. The title page is actually very important because it sends a message. Previous copies of the English Bible would actually have a picture of the monarch on it. You'd have a Bible printed under Queen Elizabeth, and it would have literally Queen Elizabeth's portrait on the cover. But that's how they did things because the church and the monarchy were connected. But King James said, no, the Bible is above the king. The Bible is above all people. And it's not for Protestants or Catholics, it's for all people. So the title is simply The Holy Bible. And the artwork has no references to the monarchy, no references to England. So the focus is on the Word of God itself. And that was a very intentional message from the king. It wasn't him giving the book. This was God speaking to all his people. And he wanted it to be used by all people, regardless of their background. So it took a little time for this to gain a foothold, but eventually it did become the translation used by everyone.
Now the book is available to everyone, so everyone should study, cultivate his mind.
Mm-hmm. And that emerged part out of that Jewish tradition of intense...
The Reformation is turning back to the Israeli idea that slaves should study.
Right, then that was the most reliable way out of slavery.
Yes, that's the true wealth of a nation.